Welcome back, everyone. I'm Jackson, and today I'm going through the case of a great white shark that destroyed a glass-bottom boat and mauled 4 tourists, from a scent trail in the water and a shark already circling to a retired man in Tanzania who stepped toward a buffalo. Starting with Tavio Huel, who booked a glass-bottom boat tour as a birthday surprise and didn't know the floor between him and a great white was never built to hold. It was September 14th, 2015. About 4 miles off the Baja California coast, the water goes from postcard turquoise to deep green, almost black the further out you get. No landmarks, just open ocean and a thin brown strip on the horizon. That's where this tour was running. No company name, no uniforms, just a laminated flyer at a hostel front desk and a local guy with a 22-foot fiberglass hull. Tavio Huel was 34, a warehouse shift supervisor from Tucson. He'd booked the trip as a birthday surprise for his girlfriend, Maris Ostler, 31. Their friends Weston and Lori Dre came along, 38 and 36. None of them had real open ocean experience. No cage, no wetsuit, just a glass viewing panel in the floor and whatever swam underneath it. The one thing Tavio didn't mention to the guide, neither he nor Maris could swim. Not well, anyway. September is peak great white season along the Baja coast. Great whites here run around 15 feet. The glass panel in the floor was decorative, not rated for structural load or impact. That detail wasn't in the flyer. Early in the tour, the guide threw fish scraps overboard to pull marine life toward the glass, leaving a scent trail in peak season. About 20 minutes in, a large dorsal fin appeared roughly 80 feet out. The guide cut the engine but didn't turn back. A dark shape passed beneath the glass. Nobody seemed alarmed. Then the fin went under and didn't come back up. 4 minutes of flat, quiet water. It felt longer. The first impact came from below, a probing bump that flexed the hull and spider-cracked the glass. Lori jerked back. Maris lost her footing. Someone laughed. Nerves more than anything. Water seeped through the fracture. Then, steadily, the guide moved for the controls, but the boat had already begun to settle unevenly. The boat listed as people shifted to keep balance, the stern dipping lower. Another bump pushed water harder through the cracked panel and along a seam near the floor. The leak turned into a steady inflow. That's when it broke down. The deck went slick. The boat listed harder. Maris slipped first, hitting the fractured panel as it gave further under her weight. The opening widened just enough. She slipped through. Tavio went in after her without hesitation. Weston followed seconds later when the boat lurched again and threw him off balance. Lori stayed on the high side, gripping what she could as the hull dipped further. The shark's behavior changed the moment they were in the water. Maris was closest. One bite, lower torso, not prolonged, just decisive. Tavio reached her and the shark came back from below. Contact at the leg and hip, a single grab and release. He didn't come back up the same way. Weston was hit next, across the back and right shoulder. Not held, but enough to open him up badly. The guide got a distress call out on a handheld radio and threw a cooler and life ring overboard as the boat continued taking on water. The vessel didn't shatter, it just settled lower as water filled it. No longer something you could stay on. A fishing vessel about 2 miles away reached the site in roughly 18 minutes. Tavio and Maris were both face down and unresponsive. Weston was conscious but losing blood fast. Lori was found on debris, physically unharmed. Maris died at the scene. The bite severed major abdominal vessels, and she bled out within minutes. Tavio couldn't be revived. Blood loss from the thigh and pelvic injuries was the cause. Weston survived. After surgery, but lost partial use of his right arm, Lori was treated for shock. The operator had no valid tour license. The fish scraps, the unrated glass panel, the lack of safety equipment, all of it came out in the review. Deaths were ruled accidental, with operator negligence cited. A waterproof camera near the debris had photos time-stamped up to 4 minutes before the first impact. The guide's radio log and the fishing vessel's GPS confirmed the rest. Case closed. Tavio booked that trip as a birthday surprise, and it ended with him and Maris both dead in the water, 4 miles from shore. Next up, we're going inland, a private big cat sanctuary, a paying tourist, and a fence that should have been fixed weeks before he ever walked through that gate. It was March 3rd, 2017. The property was in Central Florida, a privately owned stretch of land set up as a so-called big cat sanctuary. It sat back from the main road behind a tree line, hand-painted signs pointing the way. In, a gravel parking lot, and chain-link enclosures running along a dirt walking path. Not exactly what you'd picture when you hear the word sanctuary. Aldrich Fenn was 41, a high school PE teacher from Gainesville. He'd visited once before and had been talking about going back ever since. He came alone this time. His wife had declined, said the place gave her a bad feeling. Aldrich wasn't reckless, but he was enthusiastic, the kind of guy who got a little too close to things because he was genuinely fascinated by them. He'd already been redirected once by staff earlier that day for pressing up against one of the enclosure fences. What he didn't know was that the fencing along the east path had been flagged 3 weeks earlier for a compromised anchor post, and nobody had fixed it. Bengal tigers average 9 to 10 feet long and between 400 and 550 pounds for adult males. Bite force around 1,050 pounds per square inch. They're ambush predators. They close the gap fast and low and go straight for the back of the neck. The tiger in enclosure 4 was an adult male, around 7 years old, and had been pacing the east fence line since early that morning. Staff logged the behavior, but put it down to a disrupted feeding schedule. 2 other visitors earlier had watched the tiger press its full weight against the lower fence section. Neither said anything. I've seen this come up so many times. Someone notices something off and just keeps walking. Aldrich reached the east path around 2:40 p.m., alone. He stopped at enclosure 4, ignored the do not touch sign posted directly on the fence, crouched down, and pushed his arm through the chain link up to the elbow to get a low-angle shot. The tiger was about 6 feet away and had been watching him since he stopped. The anchor post gave out the moment the tiger put its full weight against the base. The bottom section of chain link peeled outward, an 18-inch gap at ground level. The tiger was through it in under 2 seconds. Aldrich was still crouched when the animal hit him, a full strike to the upper back and right shoulder that drove him face first into the ground. The tiger repositioned immediately, jaws closing on the back of his neck. He was dragged about 14 feet along the path before the animal stopped. A staff member heard the impact and came around the corner within 30 to 40 seconds. The tiger was stationary, holding Aldrich by the neck and upper back. The staff member used a CO2 horn. The animal released and moved back toward the gap on its own. A call went out at around 2:47 p.m., and first responders arrived roughly 14 minutes later. Aldrich hadn't moved since the first bite. Aldrich Fenn was pronounced dead at the scene. Cause of death was a cervical fracture at the C2 vertebra, immediately fatal. Secondary findings included deep lacerations across the upper back, a fractured right clavicle, and significant soft tissue loss. Given everything else in this story, that might be the one detail that doesn't make it worse. The facility was shut down within days. Inspectors found 3 more fence sections with compromised anchor posts across the property. The maintenance record showing the east fence repair had been scheduled and skipped was recovered, along with the logbook noting the tiger's abnormal behavior that morning. The tiger was transferred to a licensed facility. The owner faced civil proceedings, and the death was ruled accidental. Aldrich made a small mistake, but the facility made a bigger one. Coming up, Zimbabwe, a pontoon boat on a private lake tour, and a hippo that had been completely underwater for 2 full minutes before anyone on that boat thought to ask where it went. It was July 22nd, 2017. The reserve was in the lowlands of southern Zimbabwe, flat, dry country broken up by scattered brush and a wide lake running through the center of the property. The water was brown and completely opaque, the kind that swallows everything beneath the surface without a trace. The reserve ran small group boat tours twice a day, and by mid-morning the air was already sitting at 91 degrees Fahrenheit. The hippos had been in the water since before dawn. Gary Toln was 52, a retired logistics manager from Denver. He'd saved for this trip for 3 years, first time in Africa, planned every detail himself. He was traveling with a small group of 6 other tourists, all strangers, booked through the same independent operator. Gary had specifically requested a front seat on the pontoon for the best view. That detail matters later. Hippos are the 3rd largest land animal on Earth. Adult males average between 3,300 and 4,000 pounds and can reach up to 19 miles per hour on land. Their canine teeth grow up to 20 inches, and their bite force is estimated at over 1,800 pounds per square inch. They're responsible for more human fatalities in Africa than any other large land animal, and they are fiercely territorial in water. They don't give a lot of warning. And that's the part people consistently underestimate. The guide spotted a pod of 4 hippos about 200 feet ahead and cut the engine. He told the group to stay seated and keep their hands inside the boat. One of the 4 submerged. Gary, sitting at the front, leaned over the rail trying to see where it went. The guide told him to sit back. Gary pulled back briefly, then leaned out even further. Told him a second time. Gary didn't move. I'm not sure what he thought he was going to see. The water was completely brown. The hippo surfaced alongside the front left float. A 3,800-pound animal rising at speed, lifted and tilted the front corner of the pontoon. The boat pitched hard to the left, and 3 tourists went in, Gary included. The guide and 2 others grabbed the center rail and held on. Gary was face down in the water. The other 2 were screaming and swimming toward the boat, and the guide pulled them aboard. Gary didn't move. The hippo resurfaced about 15 feet away, held its position briefly, then moved off toward the far bank. The guide reached Gary with a pole and pulled him alongside the boat. He was breathing shallowly and completely unresponsive. Lifting him aboard a pontoon without a swim platform and with an unbalanced passenger load wasn't safe, so the guide looped a rope under Gary's arms, secured him to the side, radioed the base station, and started moving toward shore at low speed. A response team reached them at the shoreline about 22 minutes later. Gary couldn't be revived. Gary Toln was pronounced dead shortly after reaching shore. Primary cause of death was drowning, with blunt crush trauma to the thoracic cavity as a contributing factor. The hippo's bite had fractured 6 ribs on his left side. 2 displaced inward and punctured his left lung. He had been unconscious and face down in the water before the guide secured him, and water aspiration had begun before he was pulled alongside the boat. Either injury alone would have required immediate surgical intervention to survive. Out on that lake, he had no chance. The guide followed protocol throughout. Correct distance, clear warnings, proper response after the attack. The post-incident review found no violations on his part. Gary had been told twice to sit back and didn't, and his weight shifting at the front of the boat put him directly over the water when the hippo surfaced. The death was ruled accidental. The guide's radio log, GPS tracking data, and witness statements from the 5 surviving tourists were all recovered as evidence. Gary ignored 2 warnings and went into that water because of it. That said, northern Botswana is next, an open-air safari jeep and a bull elephant that was already in the worst possible mood before that vehicle ever came into view. It was October 9th, 2016. The reserve was in northern Botswana, vast, flat savanna broken up by acacia clusters and dry riverbeds. By October, the grass was low and yellow, and the animals were concentrated near the few remaining water sources. The tour had been running since 6 a.m. It was just past 9. Aldous Dubel was 47, a civil engineer from Portland, Oregon, traveling with his colleague Bet Sorrells, 44. They'd joined a small group safari, 4 tourists total plus a guide, booked through a local independent operator. Neither had been to sub-Saharan Africa before. They were seated in the second row of an open-air Land Cruiser. No roof, no roll cage. The trip had been Bet's idea. She'd been planning it for over a year. Aldous had agreed mostly because she'd asked him 3 times. African bush elephants are the largest land animals on Earth. Adult bulls average between 10,000 and 13,000 pounds and stand up to 13 feet at the shoulder. A charging elephant can hit 25 miles per hour, and their tusks can reach 6 feet, capable of puncturing vehicle frames. Bull elephants in musth, a hormonal state marked by elevated testosterone, are highly aggressive and don't need much of a reason to charge. The Quetzalcoatl is a dark, wet streak running down the side of the face from the temporal glands. If you see that on a lone bull, you leave. That's not a suggestion. The guide spotted a lone bull about 300 feet off the track and immediately clocked the temporal gland secretions. He called it out to the group and began reversing, no hesitation. The elephant turned to face the jeep, ears spread wide, head raised, a clear threat display. The guide kept reversing. Then Aldous leaned out over the side of the vehicle to get a better look, and Bet grabbed the roll bar and rose partially out of her seat. The guide told them both firmly to get down and stay down. Aldous pulled back slightly, but Bet stayed up, camera raised. The elephant pinned its ears and lowered its head. That's not a warning. That's the start of a charge. The bull covered the distance in under 5 seconds. The guide accelerated hard into the reverse, but the curved track killed his speed. There was no time. The right tusk connected with the front passenger passenger side of the vehicle, punching through the hood and into the engine block. The impact spun the front of the Jeep hard to the left. The elephant drove forward into the second row, tusks and forehead directly into where Aldous and Beta were seated. The right side of the vehicle lifted off the ground. Aldous took the tusk on the right side of his chest and upper abdomen. Beta was thrown hard into the interior door frame as the vehicle twisted sideways under the elephant's weight. The side panel buckled inward. The guide was slammed against the steering column, and the two front row tourists were thrown against the dash and side panels. The elephant pushed for about 8 seconds, then stepped back and stood over the vehicle before moving off slowly to the north. The guide, bruised but mobile, reached his radio and called for extraction. The nearest response team was about 35 minutes out. The two front row tourists were shaken and banged up, but conscious. Aldous and Bet were both unresponsive inside the crushed second row. Both were pronounced dead at the scene. Aldous died from a penetrating tusk wound to the right thoracic cavity, entering between the fourth and fifth ribs, causing catastrophic damage to the right lung and surrounding vessels. Bet died from blunt force trauma to the head and cervical spine, consistent with high-impact collision against the vehicle's interior frame. Neither would have survived even with immediate surgical access. The guide had called the reversal the moment he spotted the musk bull. The post-incident review confirmed he followed protocol correctly. Bet was still partially standing when the elephant charged, and Aldous had leaned out seconds before. The movement in the second row is what locked that bull in. The deaths were ruled accidental. The guide's radio log, vehicle damage analysis, and witness accounts from the two surviving tourists were all recovered as evidence. People dead in the second row of a Jeep, both of them told to sit down, neither of them listening when it mattered. Coming up is a solo canoe tour on a river you can't see through, and a predator that had already been reported in that exact stretch of water 4 days before. It was August 6th, 2014. The river cut through dense mangrove flats in the Northern Territory of Australia, narrow in places, wide and slow in others, the banks so thick with vegetation you couldn't see more than a few feet into the tree line. The water was dark, tannin-stained, completely opaque. The dry season had pulled the water level down about 2 feet from its wet season peak, concentrating everything, fish, birds, and crocodiles, into a tighter stretch of the main channel. Pressa Weiland was 29, a freelance travel writer from Austin, Texas. She was in Australia on a self-funded research trip documenting small independent tour operators. The river tour was her third activity of the week, booked through a local guide running two-person canoe tours out of a small riverside launch point. Her paddling experience was limited to calm lake kayaking. She'd told the guide this up front. He said the river was calm and the tour was beginner-friendly. She took his word for it, which honestly, given what this river was the first mistake. Saltwater crocodiles are the largest living reptiles on Earth. Adult males average 14 to 17 feet and between 1,000 and 1,500 pounds. Their bite force exceeds 3,700 pounds per square inch. They are ambush predators that use a death roll to disorient and drown prey. A rapid full-body rotation that tears tissue and pulls the victim under almost instantly. In the Northern Territory, attacks on small watercraft are documented, especially during the dry season when animals concentrate in the main channel. A large resident male had been logged in that exact section of the river 4 days before this tour. The guide hadn't checked the sighting log. Pressa definitely hadn't either. She had no reason to know it existed. The guide spotted a large crocodile basking on the left bank about 400 feet ahead and pointed it out like it was a selling point of the tour. He paddled right to give it distance. The crocodile slid into the water as they approached. The guide called it normal behavior. Pressa went quiet and started watching both sides of the water. What neither of them knew was that a second crocodile, larger, had been sitting completely still in the shallows on the right bank, the side they'd just moved toward. Pressa caught a slow ripple moving toward the canoe from the right, about 30 feet out. She pointed. The guide turned to look. The crocodile hit the right side of the canoe at mid-hull, hard enough to crack the fiberglass along the gunnel. Before either of them could do anything, its jaws closed over the right gunnel at the front, right in front of Pressa. The canoe started rolling right. She grabbed both sides of the hull, but it was already too far gone, and she went into the water. The crocodile released the canoe and was on her within seconds, jaws closing across her right arm and shoulder, immediately going into a death roll. A full, rapid rotation that wrenched the shoulder joint and pulled her straight under. The guide was screaming and hitting the water with his paddle. The crocodile surfaced briefly about 20 feet downstream, then went under. Pressa didn't come back up. The guide managed to paddle the damaged, half-flooded canoe to the nearest bank and activated the personal locator beacon he had clipped to his vest. A response team reached him by motorboat about 40 minutes later. He was physically unharmed, but not in good shape. A search of the river started immediately. Pressa's body was recovered the following morning about 600 feet downstream, partially concealed under submerged root structure along the left bank. Crocodiles cache prey in spots like that. Cause of death was drowning. The death roll had pulled her under, and she never came back up. The traumatic loss of her right arm at the shoulder was a contributing factor, but the drowning killed her. The guide's operation was found to be running without a current wildlife activity permit for that stretch of river, and he hadn't checked the sighting log that recorded the large resident male 4 days prior. Death ruled accidental, the beacon's time-stamped signal, canoe damage consistent with large crocodile bites, and the guide's written account were all recovered as evidence. Pressa trusted a guide on a river he had no permit to be on, and it cost her everything. Last one, Tanzania, a walking safari, and a tourist who kept stepping ahead of where the guide told him to be. It was May 18th, 2015. The concession was in western Tanzania, open thornbush country with low hills, scattered acacia, and dry red soil that turned to dust under your boots. Visibility was decent in most directions, maybe 80 to 100 feet, before the brush thickened. The group had been on foot for about 2 hours. It was just past 7 a.m., still cool, the kind of morning that makes you feel like nothing out here could go wrong. Harlan Drell was 55, a retired insurance broker from Nashville, Tennessee. He'd done one previous walking safari in South Africa 4 years earlier and considered himself experienced enough to know the basics. He was traveling with his adult son, River, 27, and 4 other tourists as part of a small group walking tour led by a single armed guide. Harlan was the most vocal in the group, always at the front, always asking questions, always a half step ahead of where the guide wanted him. The guide had already redirected him twice that morning. Reminded me of that one guy in every group tour who thinks the rules are more of a suggestion. Cape buffalo are among the most dangerous animals on the continent. Adult bulls weigh between 1,100 and 1,800 pounds and stand up to 5.5 feet at the shoulder. Their fused horn boss, the thick plate of bone across the top of the skull, makes a frontal charge almost impossible to stop with anything short of a high-caliber rifle. They don't bluff charge the way elephants do. When a buffalo commits, it follows through. Lone bulls are considered the most dangerous. Older, often carrying old injuries, and with very little tolerance for anything that gets too close. The guide spotted a lone bull standing in a patch of shade about 110 feet to the right of the trail. He stopped the group and signaled everyone to hold position and move left to increase distance. Harlan didn't move left. He took 2 steps forward instead, camera up. The guide signaled him back firmly. Harlan took 1 more step. The buffalo's head dropped. And just so we're clear, a dropped head on a Cape buffalo is not a warning. That's already the charge. The bull covered 110 feet in roughly 4 seconds. The guide couldn't fire. Harlan was directly in the line of sight. The right horn connected with Harlan's left side at hip level, driving upward and lifting him off the ground before throwing him about 8 feet to the right. The buffalo didn't stop. It turned and found River, who had stepped forward when he saw his father go down. The second impact caught River across the lower back and right hip, driving him face first into the ground. The buffalo stood over him briefly before the guide fired a warning shot into the dirt. The animal flinched, turned, and moved off into the brush at a trot. Start to finish, under 20 seconds. Harlan wasn't moving. River was conscious but couldn't get up. The guide radioed for extraction immediately. The group was about 3.5 miles from the nearest vehicle access point. A vehicle reached them in about 28 minutes. Harlan was unresponsive the entire time. River was alert, but couldn't bear weight on his right side. Harlan Drell was pronounced dead upon arrival at a medical facility. The horn impact ruptured his spleen and liver and fractured his left pelvis and 3 lower ribs. Internal hemorrhage was the cause of death. With a 28-minute extraction and no surgical access in the field, survival wasn't possible regardless of what anyone did after the fact. River survived, fractured right hip, 2 fractured lumbar vertebrae, and deep soft tissue bruising across the lower back. He had surgery and recovered over several months. The guide's post-incident report documented Harlan's repeated failure to follow instructions, including the 2 redirections earlier that morning. Every other tourist in the group backed it up. The guide's decision not to fire during the charge was reviewed and confirmed as the correct call. Harlan was in the line of fire the entire time. Death ruled accidental. The guide was cleared. GPS tracking data, the guide's radio log, and the written incident report filed the same day were all recovered as evidence.